have these cards here for Jones.
But you have to give them back to me. And welcome. Can you hear us out there? Can you hear us in the back? Great. A special good morning and welcome to our distinguished panel, and also to the 180 visiting teachers from across the country that are brought here to Washington, the courtesy of the Close-Up Foundation. We're indeed proud to have all of you. We appreciate all of the written questions that you are going to submit, and some of you have already submitted. And feel free during the entire session to continue to use your cards to write out questions. And we'll get to them as soon as possible. All of us here, of course, are concerned with the budget. What has happened to the country, and what has happened to the 186 banks that have closed across the country just this last year? The bankrupt farmer, the small businessman that's having such a problem meeting interest rates and payments on his business to stay alive. We're all concerned about that, and that's the reason this panel is being formed. And we've all asked questions about this red ink problem that's been spread across our country. For instance, whose finger is large enough to put in the dike of congressional spending? Whose arm is strong enough to force Congress to meet the budgetary deadlines that they have set for themselves? These are all serious questions, and all questions that affect each of us in our daily lives. One of the big, of course, continuing questions that we have is, where is the elected official that will stand up and say, no, I'm not going to support your project because it might knock the wheels off of this federal budget? Most of the time, all of us tend to say, let's go next to the neighboring state, to maybe Congressman Rhodes' state, Arizona, and say, no, let's knock some of those high-cost projects in his state or in his district. So the question is the belt-tightening system that we have to inaugurate across the land to help us get rid of this deficit. This morning, we're not here to point the finger or to call names necessarily, although that might happen, but we're here in a spirit of cooperation in hopes to find some kind of solution to this problem. And hopefully these panelists who are skilled in this, who've spent their lives doing it, can shed a ray of hope and some light on the budget process. I think we'd like to start this morning with Alice Rivlin, who, as you know, probably is best known as being the high priestess of the budget process in this country. She was an outstanding director of the Congressional Budget Office. She is still giving over her life as a leading budget expert in the think tank called the Brookings Institute, which is one of the largest. And I think her activity is very appealing across the country because she has taken time for public affairs programs like this. You know, it was Pericles, I think, who said that those who do not participate in public affairs are not only worthless, but wastes of time. And I think that your participation this morning further exhibits that interest in helping this problem. I think, Ms. Revlin, if you don't mind, we'll appeal to your practical side. It seems that the questioners are most concerned about the red ink that's been spilled across this country and the monstrous proportions in which it has been spilled. One of the leading questions that comes from all of you is that how, Ms. Revlin, do you tie this in with the steel worker in Pittsburgh, be he unemployed or not, to the car salesman in Ohio, to the bankrupt farmer in the Midwest? Ms. Rivlin?
Well, that's a large order, but I think really it's fairly simple. We tend to make the budget into some enormous mystery, and Professor Tobin used the word monstrous problem. Actually, I think it's quite a simple problem. We made a big mistake. We cut taxes and we didn't cut spending, and when you do that, you get a deficit. The problem for the United States is that we're using a very large part of our national saving to finance the deficit, and that means we aren't using it for productive investment. We've had to borrow abroad to get money for that productive investment, and that in turn has meant that capital flowing in from abroad meant that the dollar was very expensive, and it was hard on our export industries. That's where the steel worker comes in, or our import competing industries. The deficit has kept the interest rates very high. That has complicated the farm situation. And it was a mistake which is very hard to recover from. The dollar has come down now, and it will be better for makers of steel and makers of other things, and for farmers. But when you make a bad mistake, it takes a long time to come back from it, and we haven't corrected this one yet.
Thank you very much. Also, there's a current new buzzword in town called competitiveness. Do you think and the questioners again repeat this question, do you think that it is really the uncompetitiveness of our economy that's slowing us down, or is it slow-moving politics?
I'm not sure those are either-or possibilities. We have a lot of problems in the American economy, one of which I've already alluded to. We put ourselves in an unnecessarily difficult competitive position in the world by the mistakes that flowed from making a large federal deficit. But as we look ahead, there's no reason why the United States economy can't compete. We need to work hard, and we need to do the things we're best at, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the U.S. economy that means that we can't compete in the world. Much of the damage we have done to ourselves through the high value of the dollar.
How do you reconcile the enormous bankruptcies across the country and also the 186 banks that have closed with the fact that we are in our 5th year, and you can correct us as an economist if that fact is wrong, of continuing expanding economy? It seems that's difficult to reconcile those two. Could you do that for us?
Well, the banking problem has flowed again in part from the difficulties of agriculture and in part from the ups and downs of the interest rates caused by our erratic fiscal and budget policy. Many of the banks that are in trouble are savings and loans, thrift organizations that were started in an era of much lower interest rates and had great difficulty readjusting to a different world.
Yes, the next questioner starts with a premise that says we are living off of the Japanese savings. And the question that follows, of course, is what will happen to this country if, in fact, the foreign investors, namely the Japanese and others, lose their appetites for our treasury bonds, for instance? How dependent on are